Okay, in this video we're going to go ahead and take a look at how to tackle the essential skills in algebra for precalculus. So let's start off with the first one. We got x all on one side, and what we're going to have to do is that we're going to have to use the distributive property to go ahead and bust out those parentheses. So that is going to give us our next line. So negative 3 times 1 is a negative 3. Negative 3 times a negative 5x is positive 5x. And now we have our next line ready to go. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is that we have the x's on both sides here, and we want to collect like terms. And so we're going to bring everything down. I got a negative 3. I got 15x minus 5x, which is going to be 10x equals a negative 63. Then I'm going to add 3 to each side. Going to go ahead and isolate the x, and I bring everything down. I get 10x equals a negative 60. And then finally, I want to go ahead and divide off the 10. And that is going to give me x equals a negative 6. Okay, and so that's our first skill that's going to be expected of us, to go ahead and a little bit more of a complex linear equation solving for x. So on to the next one, where we go ahead and have x's on both sides. Okay, for this next one, we want to go ahead and break down the parentheses, and we notice that we got variables on both sides. So we're going to have to do some collecting like terms on both sides eventually, and then busting the thing down, moving the x's to one side, and then all the constants to another. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to tackle this part first. I know that a negative x plus 4x is going to give me 3x. And just doing some distributive properties, flipping the sign over there, I'm going to get positive 4 minus x, and then over here I'm going to get a 6x minus 18. Okay. Next step is that I'm going to collect like terms on both sides. Looks like the left-hand side is all set with this, a 3x, so I'm going to bring that down. And I have a 4 and a negative 18 and a negative x and a positive 6x. So on the left-hand side, or I'm sorry, the right-hand side, I'm going to get 5x and then minus 14. Okay, so now I want to move the x's all to one side, and so therefore I'm going to subtract the 5x here, and that's going to give me a negative 2x equals a negative 14. And then finally, I'm going to divide off the negative 2, and that's going to give me x equals 7. Okay, and so that's the second skill that we're expected to be able to do, is manipulate the variables on both sides of a linear equation to solve for x. Okay, in this next set, we're going to have to go ahead and factor and then solve using the zero product property. And so for this this first one here on the left, what we're going to go ahead and do is that, I know that we've seen this many times before we got the precalculus, is that we're looking to, what are two numbers that are going to multiply to a negative 18 and add to a negative 3. Okay, and so after looking at some possibilities, I know that we can probably do this in our head. We're going to get negative 6 and positive 3. So just to check, negative 6 times 3 is going to give us 18, which is good. And then negative 6 plus 3 is going to give us a negative 3. So we know that those work. So we kind of hijack those numbers, and we use it to go ahead and build these two polynomials that are going to be, the two binomials that are going to be multiplied by one another. And so like the zero product property dictates, is that when we have two things that are multiplied by one another and equal 0, we could go ahead and solve by setting each part equal to 0. And so it looks like after some algebra, we got x equals 6, x equals a negative 3. And that's that solution right there. This guy, which students seem to go ahead and have problems with, is that we're looking to go ahead and still factor, but not use this method right here. We're just looking to factor out a common term and then set it equal to 0 so we can solve. We're looking for what's in common with both of those terms. So we know a 7's in common, so we can bring a 7 out. And we know that an x is in common, so we can bring an x out. And what's going to be left is x plus 7 equals 0. As a quality of life thing, you can check whether or not you're correct by just kind of mentally distributing and seeing if you get the, I should say, the original problem. If you do, you know that you have factored correctly. So let's go ahead and use the zero product property to solve from here. I'm going to set these two equal to 0. I get 7x equals 0 and x plus 7 equals 0. So when I solve, I'm going to divide by 7 and x is going to equal 0. I'm going to subtract 7 and x equals a negative 7. Okay, and so those are how we do those type of problems. We're going to see them quite a bit in Precalculus, so it's best to get familiar with them and just be able to pass our essential skills algebra. So on to the next problems. Okay, so this next one here is going to go ahead and be a quadratic, and we need to go ahead and arrange it in a standard form quadratic equation to go ahead and apply the quadratic formula to it. So that means is that everything has to be on one side and equal to 0. So to do that, we're just going to move that 3 to the other side. We're going to get x squared plus 3x minus 3 equals 0. And now we have to go ahead and apply this to the quadratic formula. So let's look at the quadratic formula. Okay, so there it is, and we know that x, what we're trying to solve for, is going to go ahead and equal all this good stuff when we plug it on in and do the arithmetic to knock it out. But we need to locate what a, b, and c are. To do so is that we want to go ahead and use the quadratic equation in standard form to locate those. And so if we set it up like that and just match everything up, we can see that a equals 1, b equals 3, and c equals a negative 3. So let's go ahead and plug this into the quadratic formula and see how everything shakes loose. Okay, so locating a, b, and c and plugging it on in, we get this this arithmetic, a little bit of a mess here. And let's go ahead, and I forgot my minus sign in there, and see how that's going to knock out. So I know that the opposite of 3 is going to give me a negative 3, plus or minus, and let's just take a look at each bit of this separately. That's going to give me 9, and that's going to go ahead and give me what? Positive 12, and so I know under there, I think I drew this radical bar a little bit too big, and so that's going to give me what? 21 under there. And this is going to give me a 2. So it looks like the thing that we have to worry about is can I simplify that radical? And I cannot. So the square root of 21 is just is. I can't simplify it or do anything with it. So therefore, it looks like that this is going to be the solution. So I get a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 21 all over 2. So that's how we're going to go ahead and knock that out. And yeah, on to the next one. Okay, number 6 here. And we're going to have to solve an equation with a square root involved. So to do so, what we need to do is that we need to get the square root all by itself. And I'm going to start that by subtracting 1 from each side. And I'm going to get the square root of x plus 3 equals 1. So to do or undo the square root, what we're going to have to do is that from Math 2 and Math 3, I believe, we learned that we could undo it by taking the square of both sides, or raising each side to the second power. So that's going to undo the square root, and I'll get x plus 3, and 1 squared is 1. And so therefore, I subtract 3 from each side, and I'm going to go ahead and get x equals a negative 2. So that's how you do that, and on to the next one. Okay, solving an absolute value equation. And so if the absolute value, just to go ahead and I'm going to do a little side lesson when the time comes, but it's going to require a kind of a step where we're going to have to split off in a positive and negative direction, and you'll see what that means in a moment. So the first thing I want to do is isolate everything that is in the absolute value. So I go, so absolute value of x minus 6 equals 13. Now, as a little side note, say if I were to go ahead and have the absolute value of x equals 13, the solution could go ahead and be, x could be positive 13 and negative 13, I should say, or negative 13. That said, is that we're very concerned with whatever this is that is going to equal the positive version or the negative version of that outcome. So, building on that notion, what we're going to do is that we're going to split this off into two different scenarios, positive and negative. So, we know that x minus 6 could equal a positive 13, and x minus 6 could equal a negative 13. And then from there, we'll solve. Add 6 to each side, and I get x equals 19. I add add 6 to each side. I don't know if I said x and the other part should have been 6. But add 6 to each side, and I know that I am going to get x equals a negative 7. Okay? So, that said, is that we always have to account for a positive and negative scenario, and we always have to check in the absolute value equation that this is going to be positive. If it's negative, we know that there's going to be no solution because we can't take the absolute value of something and have a negative answer. So that's how you do that, and on to the inequality. Okay, so for the essential skills inequalities, what we're going to do is that we're going to do the algebra, but we got to keep in mind that anytime that we have an inequality sign, anytime that we multiply or divide by a negative, we're going to have to flip that sign. And so, that said, let's do some algebra and then keep our head on when it comes time to. So, we're going to bring everything down and use the distributive property to clean up those parentheses first. That's going to give me a negative 25x and a 20 over here, and I got some collecting like terms to do on the left side. For example, those guys. So that's going to give me a negative 27x plus 20 is going to be greater than a negative 115. So I'm going to subtract 20 from each side, and that's going to give me a negative 27x is going to be greater than a negative 135. And so, from here, I'm going to divide by a negative. Now, when I divide by the negative 27, that is going to take this sign, and we're going to have to flip it around, okay? And so that x is, and to go in there, let's see, I believe it's going to go in there, 5 times? And so a negative divided by negative is positive, so we know that x is going to be less than 5 for that particular solution. Okay, so again, what we're trying to go ahead and do is refresh our memory with solving inequalities, and when we divide by a positive, when we divide or multiply by a negative, we're going to have to flip the sign around, like in the case that we just saw. So that's how you do that, and on to the next problem. Okay, with this next one, it's a little bit of a tricky bird because there's 2 different ways that we can do it, and since you can use a calculator on your essential skills, let's explore both. The first kind of non-calculator way is to go ahead and get these bases equal to one another, because if we get bases equal to one another, we can set the exponents equal to one another and then solve. However, 9 does not equal 81, and so therefore we got some work to do. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to rewrite 81 as 9 to the second power. So if I go 9 to the second power, I know that that's going to be multiplied by the original exponent. Oops, and that's a 3 there. It doesn't look like it, but let's clean that up. And since now we have the bases equal to one another, we can set these exponents equal to one another and solve. So I got a 3x equals, and now I'm going to, let's save that to later, 2. We'll do the algebra all right here. Okay, and so what we're going to do is that we're going to use the distributive property and just knock this thing out algebraically. So we got a 4x plus 6, and I'm going to move all the x's to one side, so I'm going to subtract this 4x over here, and that's going to give me a negative 7x equals 6. Divide by negative 7, I get x equals a negative 6 over 7. Okay, so and finally is solving system equations, and this one's pretty basic because usually the way that it's loaded, this is already served up to you. So if we're solving for x and y, I should say that we're solving for x in the essential skills here, is that we're going to take everything that y equals and we're going to plug it on in and solve for x. So we get a negative 3x plus 5. Now everything that y equals is going to go in, so we got a 3x plus 8 like that. And instead of writing the y, which is right there, equals 4. So now we're going to use the distributive property and start knocking down things that are going to solve for x. Okay, collect some like terms right here, and I get a negative 18x plus 40 equals 4. Subtract 40 from each side. Okay, and we get a negative x equals a negative 36. Divide by negative 18 on each side, and we get x equals 2. And that's all that it's solving for right now. We could find out what y equals by plugging it into either one of those equations, but as it stands, the essential skills is just being able to go ahead and unfurl the x value. So that's how you do that. Good luck on your next try at the essential skills algebra, and yeah, hope you do well. If not, rewatch or ask some questions in class, and we'll get you going in the right direction. So that's how you do that, and see you in class.